In the role of mercenaries, when you have an armed militia group, there's a big component of who's going to stop us.
When you grow up in war and that's your skill set, and let's say war ends, what do? You look for more war if that's your career.
How are they going to stop them from recruiting these Colombian soldiers? It's like, well, unless they take their passports, if they leave the country, they can just go and get armed somewhere else. So
I've been doing business in foreign markets for almost 20 years. I saw exactly where this is going. What happens is that things go great in all these Latin American countries for a while, and then some left-leaning lunatic politician gets in and turns the country socialist. And this is exactly what's happening in Honduras right now.
what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Adventure Capitalist Podcast. The Adventure Capitalist Podcast is a podcast for the uncommon man. We talk about investments, geopolitics, adventure, and living an interesting and exciting life. I'm here with my co-host, Colombian Cody, back from an adventure in South America. How you doing, my man?
I'm good. I'm still catching up on some much needed rest, and I'm very, very glad to be back at sea level. I have found out, actually, I've known this for all my life, but I just reaffirmed it, that I am not a high altitude dweller. Like, my body just says no, like, get down the mountain, do not do this, go down. And I just confirmed that again in Colombia at 17,000 feet. 17,000 feet is not like extreme height, but it's enough to have
high.
Like the migraine set in and like my bowel system get backed up and just like bad news physically. Beautiful.
You're a water creature. You are born by the beach.
I'm a sea
Love
dweller.
The beach,
I'm a merman.
Sea dweller. So, okay, I haven't really got any info on this trip. So I know you went down, you hiked a big mountain. What was the name of the mountain down there?
It has multiple names, but if you want to Google, it's Tolima, Tolima, Tolima.
Okay.
And it's a little over 17,000 feet. It's always tough because, you know, Americans on the imperial system, they do all the kilometers and meters everywhere else in the world. So when they're referencing things throughout the trip, I'm like doing this math in my head. So I'm like, whatever. It's around 17,000 feet.
Yeah.
And I've done other mountain climbs taller than this, but this mountain climb was hard, dude. Like, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done.
Was it ice crampons?
Yep.
Picks,
Crampons,
like
ice
that?
pick. We're on a glacier. I was with two other buddies and a guide. We were roped together. We had like rappelling. It was gnarly. It was the real deal. It was snowing. It was windy. It was obviously cold. And again, the altitude just jacked me up. And, you know, when we summited the mountain, usually you would see like a beautiful view. And of course, this is one of those trips where like we had everything going against us. We got to the top. It was like foggy and like it's like sleeting snow and couldn't really see anything. And the three of us, me and my two other buddies, were like, let's get the hell off this mountain. So we were up at the summit for like 5 minutes, and they were like, you know what? Let's get the hell off this thing and get back down. And my body inside was just like, go down, get lower, get more oxygen.
It's the true type 2 fun that, you know, will only get more fun in the rearview mirror as you look back on it. Right? Like in the moment when we went on a backpacking trip a few years ago that my friend organized, and the first night it was 2 degrees.
Cool.
And it was the coldest that I've ever been. Did not sleep at all that first night. And, you know, the next morning we were just like, okay, get up, get moving. It finally warmed up. But I look back on that as fun. In the moment, not that. Of
course. Fun. Well, it's good. I'll give a quick rundown of the trip. I won't bore everybody with the trip report because I don't want to be like, yeah, here's my slideshow and here's all the pictures. But I'll give you a quick, briefing of what we did. And I actually recommend this for anybody in the United States. It's only like a 3.5 hour direct flight from the US to Colombia. We flew directly into Armenia, which is the coffee district, and then went to the town called Salento. We hiked about 15 miles up into the mountains to this ranch, and it's completely off grid. Like, they literally, only way you can get there is by horseback or by mules. So we hiked in. That was our base camp, and we hiked the mountain from there. All in all, over about 3 or 4 days, we hiked about 50 miles. But this was at altitude and up and down, so it was really tough. But what I'm getting to is that, seeing the people living out there, it's hardcore. They're at 12,000 feet. They're like literally living off the land. It's cold, it's gnarly. And it just makes you remember like the luxuries we have back in the US or back in first world nations. And it also makes you realize a lot of the shit we deal with in our first world lives is just that. It's shit. It's so pointless. It's so stupid, the stuff we get riled up about. And that was a big reminder for me on this trip, is just getting back to nature and seeing how a lot of different people live around the world, and saying, you know what, we may have all this money and all these sophisticated things, but I think these people have some of like life's true meanings figured out a little bit more: family and enjoying time together and good food and enjoying nature. And so being there for me was a good reminder. You know what? I got to reassess some of the things that are important in life. And I think everyone needs that every now and then, right? You need that maybe a couple of times a year to remind yourself, whether that's freezing your ass off like you did on our backpacking trip or going to a different country. You need that in life.
100%. All my pivotal life choices have typically come from a period of like disconnection and from the internet, technology, other people, like being alone, and then through challenge, right? It's like you kind of can get more clear on where you want to go. So
absolutely,
that's awesome. So
it's fun.
I'm excited. I'm going to see you Thursday. So if you're listening to this podcast on Thursday, today in Austin, we have a sold out Adventure Capitalist dinner in Austin, Texas, with a wait list. And I'm really looking forward to this. We got a group of awesome people that are coming in from literally all over the country for this dinner. We're going to be hosting more of these going forward. And Cody and I are flying to Boulder, Colorado the following week to map out a much larger iteration of where Adventure Capitalist is going. And I think you're going to be very, very excited about it. So that's kind of teasing out what's coming. We got a big show though today, and lots of interesting stuff going on in the world. Speaking of Colombia, fascinating story came out in the Wall Street Journal this week about Colombian mercenaries going and fighting in Ukraine. And just a little bit of a backstory, like these mercenaries were hired at one point. I think there was about 300 or 500 of them. I think it was the initial report over there at the beginning of the war. Since then, they've been going through massive hardship, like crazy stuff. A lot of them have been killed. They're involved with a bunch of different aspects of the war. Cody, give us kind of a rundown. How did you find out? When did you first see this? And what was kind of the thing that was most interesting to you about this story?
So listeners know that I own real estate in Colombia. I have a very close connection to the country. I spent a lot of time down there. I was literally just there a couple of days ago. So when I saw this story pop up on the Wall Street Journal, of course, I read it. And there's actually an investing opportunity here, which I'm going to get to in a little bit. But the article just explains, like you said, how these mercenaries from Colombia are going really around the world. And Colombia has been at war, has had this drug, narco war going on for decades now. So when you think of warriors, there's actually a lot of really experienced, deadly people in Colombia on both sides, the bad side, good side, or whatever side you want to call good and bad. And when you grow up in war and that's your skill set, and let's say war ends, what do? You look for more war if that's your career. And so Colombians worldwide have become kind of this like cream of the crop mercenary group. And there's a bunch of them fighting in Ukraine. So the Wall Street Journal put this article out. We'll put a screenshot up here so you can see what it is and search it for yourself. But this article is wild because there's so many references to other countries and different factions. It's like kind of tough to follow. But the main point is that it gets across there is a crazy, crazy opportunity for mercenaries to really get paid an insane amount of money anywhere in the world. And the people paying this money are the sources you'd least likely suspect. And these Colombians are really kind of leading the charge. And the numbers that the Wall Street Journal shares, I think are like really, really underestimated because, as we all know, the fog of war, there's probably some things going on we don't know about. But there's literally hundreds of people, or hundreds of Colombians in Ukraine and hundreds of Colombians in Russia, and they're fighting each other, even though they may be like friendly if they're back in their home country. It's such a cluster F that it's hard to explain. But the bigger picture is this idea of mercenaries being this trend coming back. And we talked about this with Sean McFate several episodes ago, how he thinks that mercenaries are the future of warfare. We talked about this 2 episodes ago in our War Dogs episode. We talked about how people can make money in war. And this is a perfect example of how going forward, you can see how these targeted specific groups of people are going into conflict zones, getting missions accomplished for other nations, and being paid crazy amounts of money to do stuff that the public doesn't really know about. And I'll end it with just saying that this is kind of like one of those cyclical historical stories, because in Roman history, mercenaries were actually a really big thing. The Romans would hire foreigners to come fight wars that they didn't want to get bother with, and they would just use money for it. That's why one of the reasons the Roman Empire fell. But this is just another story of history repeating itself.
It's really interesting watching the kind of the nation state idea of war be eroded and replaced back with a more like Lindy or durable vision of what war is, which is often led by profits, right? Led by, okay, we're going to pay these people, we're going to pay Colombians to fight in Ukraine against Russians for, $5,000 or $10,000 a month, ship them in there. There's Colombians also fighting on the Russian side, fighting other Colombians fighting on the Ukrainian side. There was 20 Colombians implicated in an assassination attempt of the Haitian president in 2021. So lots of wild stuff going on over there. And the president's actually trying to pass legislation to prevent these mercenaries from being recruited from Colombia. But really, it's one of those things that I think I took away from that episode with Sean McFate, which was fascinating, is in the role of mercenaries, there's a big component of like, who's going to stop us, right? Like when you have an armed militia group doing things, like how are they going to stop them from recruiting these Colombian soldiers? It's like, well, you can't leave unless they take their passports. How, if they leave the country, they can just go and get armed somewhere else. So it seems to me like a kind of a wasted, or just like a pointless piece of legislation, because if the mercenaries can get outside the country and get to where they need to go fight, they can get armed there and get paid there.
Totally. And I think the bigger picture here, which I'm going to explain the investing opportunity in just a second, but I also wanted to mention the other opportunity that Colombians are getting involved in right now, as we speak. They're getting paid $6,000 a month. So what's that, a little over $70,000 a year to be professional soldiers in Africa right now. And it's a UAE group backed by Russian financing to go fight in Sudan and the Congo right now. And so if you're a Colombian, you're back in Colombia going, I'm whatever,
making $200 a month or whatever. Yeah,
whatever it is, or 70 grand a year. Of course, they're going to take this job. So the bigger picture here, what you're getting at is the president is trying to prevent Colombians from leaving the country. How about you just make your economy better locally so they don't have to leave, so they can do things internally in the country? And that's the investing opportunity I wanted to mention, is that Petro, who is the current president of Colombia, I think he's going to be a goner on this next election. And that was my takeaway from the past week in Colombia, was people on the ground that are not happy with his leadership. Most recently, he kind of got, we talked about this, how Trump kind of smacked him down because he denied taking illegal immigrants from the U.S. back to Colombia, that they were Colombian citizens. And then Trump was like, we're going to put tariffs on you. And then Petro was like, okay, fine, we'll take them.
Send them.
Yeah. So
but we'll send our planes.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a very weak position for the Colombian president to be looked at geopolitically and globally. But domestically in Colombia, people are not happy either. Because of that, it was embarrassing for the Colombians, but also the economy in Colombia just is not doing well. So 2 things: the Colombian ETF GXG looks interesting right now, very, very cheap, and also pretty high yield. And then their oil company, Ecopetrol, ticker is EC. yield of over 30% right now on a PE of around like 4 or 5. Ridiculously cheap, super high yield. Not saying it's a good investment right now. I'm just saying that if Petro does not get elected, the valuations of both those companies could easily double, giving you a 2x implied return on your investment. And that's something that investors should keep an eye on with the changing tide of Colombia.
Interesting. I want to keep kind of transition because we're going to stay in Latin America, because Javier Milei, the Argentinian president, just weeks after Trump got scrutiny for launching both the Melania coin and his Trump coin, Milei's in a scandal that sparked because on February 14th, he promoted this cryptocurrency called Libra on his social media account. He claimed that this private project would stimulate Argentina's economic growth by funding small businesses and startups. Libra pumped up to about 4.5 billion and then dropped rapidly down to 300 million. So some information came out about what was going on. 95% of this coin was held by insiders. The Kelsier team, which was kind of behind the scenes doing this, apparently made over $110 million. He claims that he didn't really know much about what was happening. He just wanted to raise, he since deleted his post. So he posted it, it ran up, then he deleted his post. And he's saying basically like, I just thought I was doing something to promote business in Argentina. And then everybody got rugged and the Argentinian stock exchange dropped 7%. Solana went down 10%. Do you think he's telling the truth? What do you think is happening here? Are we entering do you think he is actually telling the truth? Do you think he was hoodwinked? Or is this some sort of like larger scheme to enrich himself?
There's a couple answers here. First of all, like I make no bones about it. I'm a Milei supporter. I'm a Trump supporter. I'm a Bukele supporter. I'm a supporter of all these people that are kind of giving the middle finger to the traditional way everything's going. But the second any of these guys, actually Bukele, I think he knows what's going on. But the second Milei or Trump gets involved in crypto, it's just, oh my God, it's so cringeworthy for me. That's what makes me believe they don't actually understand crypto. And so I actually do think that Milei got hoodwinked. I do think that he really just doesn't know what's going on in the crypto world, especially when it pertains to meme coins. And I think Trump too. I just don't think they really understand what's going on there. They're trying to stay relevant with their younger crowd, and they're also seeing a way to make money, but they don't understand that it has like real negative long-term implications and short-term ones too. I mean, people lost a lot of money, and it was more or less the fault of these high-profile politicians. So. Yeah. I think it's bad. I do not think that any political head of state should be getting involved in any sort of launched cryptocurrency other than supporting an established like Bitcoin. That's fine with me, but do not get involved with any self-launch NFT, meme coin, whatever. Do not touch that if you're a politician. So that really pisses me off about what's going on there. But I don't think he was like trying to scam people. But it doesn't change the image. He looks stupid that he did that.
Looks really bad. Trump looked bad.
Totally.
Doing the Trump coin. I think, at the core, one of the reforms I hope is that politicians are not able to trade stocks, equities, meme coins, Bitcoin, really anything. It does not make sense given the positions of power that they're in to be able to enrich themselves. I hope that some transparency comes out. I think that's one of the things Elon's been talking about is investigating. One of the reasons he's receiving a lot of pushback on Doge is he said, hey, well, we're going to track down and try to figure out how some of these politicians entered into politics with like $100,000 to their name, and then they leave 20 years later with $200 million, and their official salary is $90,000 a year or something like that. Right. And so, yeah, I also agree. I think it's a terrible look, and we're in a very, very bizarre time, right? It's where these coins can pop up, and you've got bad actors who, there's other people involved as well. It's not like this whole team was targeting lots of different people to try to get them to promote it, including Dave Portnoy, who was told, hey, promote this thing. He didn't do it because he felt like, I don't know what he felt. He said something was off. And then, but he's a little bit more savvy online. And he's already been through one of these things where he promoted
He's like
something.
the world's worst crypto investor.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
He's entertaining.
It's a great bit, though. It's a great bit now, you know? Well, speaking, it's kind of keeping it in finance corner. It's very interesting. Not in the crypto side of things, going back to like old school gold. Gold right now is currently being flown from London to New York in unusually high volumes. It's very interesting. There's a story that came out this week from Business Insider that significant amounts of gold are being taken out of the UK's central bank and flown to New York. And much of this is driven by fears around the impact of tariffs. So what is that? Why is this happening? So there's uncertainty, and that means that the gold held at the Bank of England has been trading at a discount to the wider market. And some of these traders are facing delays to make withdrawals. So roughly 8,000 bars of gold are believed to have been moved out of the bank's vaults over the past few months, about 2% of its total stock. What do you think is going on here, Cody? Why is this happening in like layman's terms? Who's making money? And is this going to continue?
I think there's three things going on here. First of all, the most obvious one that a lot of these articles point to is that people have fear of these tariffs being enacted. So if you own gold, you're in the US and your gold is held in London, that doesn't make sense, especially if tariffs are actually going to be
and you want to bring your gold back.
Totally.
You immediately lose 20% or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's the first one. The second one is that I think there's a general fear in the market. There's like a gut feeling of everybody thinking that our entire global financial system is somewhat of a house of cards. And it's probably good to play that game for a little while, but you also want to have that hedge, which is gold. And so I think people are getting the feeling that they should be like getting more and more cautious as this house of cards continues to get higher and higher. And then the third thing, and this is kind of a hard to quantify idea, but I think there's a suspicion that the paper gold market compared to the physical gold market has gotten out of control. And I'll explain that in just a moment. And the result of this out of control feeling is that people want that physical metal. So what the difference in what I'm talking about with paper and physical is that you can purchase shares of gold, and I'm saying paper, not literally paper, but like on the stock market, and then it's represented by physical gold somewhere else. But there's a high suspicion by a lot of people that there's some sort of kind of fractional banking strategy going on here, which is we're going to issue a certain amount of shares that are redeemable in gold, but there might be more of those shares being issued than there actually is physical gold. And the fear I think people have is that, you know, this has been going on for decades now, but at some point there's, you know, somebody have to pay the piper here. And the other part of this entire story, which I'll get to right now, is that there's been talk about auditing Fort Knox. And this is going on in real time on X. I don't know if will happen, but there's been this movement to audit the Fed, audit Fort Knox. Like, what is actually going on internally at the US government? And this whole trend, which is, hey, what is there actually gold in Fort Knox? Is there actually gold supporting this paper gold that's out there?
Is there gold the amount that they say that there is? That's
right.
There's obviously gold there.
Yes, but we don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying the bigger picture globally is people are all of a sudden realizing, wait, I have this like coupon for a amount of gold, but I don't actually know if that's real or not, because people have lost trust in institutions because of the whole pandemic era, because of ridiculous corruption globally, and because a lot of the stuff that's coming out right now that the Doge team is uncovering, which is this massive rampant fraud everywhere. And it's not just the US, it's many other countries. So I think a lot of investors who are holding their wealth in gold, specifically paper gold, are starting to scratch their head and go, you know what? It might be a good idea to get that physical form of my wealth security back in my home country, and perhaps even back like in my personal vault right now. And so this run on physical gold that's unfolding right now, I don't know how much worse. It's not like bad right now, but it's certainly a trend. Like, this is out in the open. People know this is happening. if this is uncovered that there's more paper gold than physical gold, I think you could see the price of gold just go to levels you would not even believe.
Yeah, I mean, gold is what it's trading above. It's at 29.30 when we record this, almost at all-time highs. It's recovered off of a little bit of a drop, and yeah, it's up. I mean, gold's up 15% in the last 6 months, up 40% in the last year. And my take on it is that this is one of those outcomes of volatility, and we are having an incredibly volatile change from one administration to the second administration. And there's this larger picture that's happening around the world of increased volatility from one government coming in and taking over with a further left position, and then it being replaced with a much further right position. And when this, it's interesting because there's this point when I think about like the role of the deep state, right? What is the role of a deep state? It's obviously got a purpose. It's to provide some level of continuity in a government's policy. And what we're seeing right now is a radical shift from previous policy to new policy. And an example, if people think down the road, oh, wow, I could have my gold held in England, and then if I need to import it into the US, I'm going to pay like a 20% tariff on it. It's just so much easier for them to be like, well, let's just take care of this right now. We'll pay a little bit to bring it home. And these are just second order consequences of a radical shift in policy. And yeah, I think this is, while all these things are interesting to me, what Trump is doing, I think we're not totally aware of all the second order consequences that are going to come out of a massive shift. And
well, that's what's being uncovered
Yeah.
in the market right now, right? Is these second order consequences, which is
for sure.
if A plus B equals C, like what's the next step, or however that goes. And I think global investors are currently sorting that out, which is this quote run on physical gold. I want to point out though that this is actually a pretty bullish case for Bitcoin, I believe, because I'm a gold bug. I'm a huge believer
Also for gold.
and for gold for sure. But
Yeah.
the problem with gold, which is happening right now, is that you physically have to hold it. And if you don't physically hold it, meaning like you trust a bank or some sort of place to some vault, you there's that trust there, right? And you're ultimately trusting that holder to maintain your wealth. Whereas
Yeah.
Bitcoin, you can actually hold your keys, you can transfer it anywhere, and it's not physically cumbersome, just like gold is. Now, I could give arguments why gold's better because you can physically hold it, blah, 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 blah. But my point is that as we go further into the future, I can see gold being phased out and Bitcoin replacing that store of wealth, because Bitcoin really is a superior store
It can be
of wealth.
verified. That, I mean,
Yes.
it's this whole idea of like, how do you verify the amount of gold in Fort Knox? Well, you can verify the amount of Bitcoin available in the market. You can look at wallets. That's one of the trustless nature of Bitcoin and the transparency that it provides is the main case of why it's a better replacement for gold.
Of course. And I think also gold bugs will always make the argument that, oh, well, gold has like industrial use cases. It's used in electronics and blah, 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 blah. But I mean, let's get real. Like most gold bugs are holding gold because it's a globally accepted store of value that goes back thousands of years, which I agree with. I'm not arguing with. But the thing is that with Bitcoin, gold bugs will say, well, Bitcoin's this new fad, it's a tulip, mania. It's going to be this bubble that bursts, blah, blah, blah. And eventually Bitcoin will go away. The thing is, though, and my belief is that Bitcoin has gone past that peak of adoption, meaning we're not, there's no going back now. So many people have adopted it globally that it's a global commodity that people agree is a way to store your wealth, just like gold is. And for sure, gold has a head start and much more proof over millennia. But I think Bitcoin will displace it in the long run.
Yep. I want to transition a little bit but I want to kind of stay on one topic, which is shifting governments. I mentioned, we're seeing the second order consequences of a radical change in policy by a new administration in the United States. And we're seeing the same thing play out right now in Honduras. And I want to give you a little bit of a backstory because it's very interesting where there's a headline about this $11 billion lawsuit on a libertarian island in Honduras. And the backers in this lawsuit, one of them is Peter Thiel. I want to dive in a little bit of a backstory into what happened that has led up to this interesting lawsuit. So 2009, the Honduran president, Manuel Zelaya, I believe is how you pronounce it, was forcibly removed from office by the military and exiled to Costa Rica in a coup. The post-coup government, so the person who replaced them was Lobo, and he was in office from 2010 to 2014. And when this coup happened, they replaced a more, let's just say, like isolationist type leader with a leader that's more open to foreign investment, to libertarian economic ideas. And in 2010, President Lobo issued a decree to create the first iteration of zones for employment and economic development, ZEDES. So the ZED law, or the ZED law, provided this legal framework for autonomous economic zones within Honduras. Now, if you're familiar with anything that's going on, like Macau, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Guangzhou in China, these are all special economic zones.
The Panama Canal Zone. There's
Panama
Philippines
Canal
has a bunch. Iran has a bunch. They're all over Africa. These special economic zones. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's great. These economic zones are basically areas where the taxation and business law is done differently than in the rest of the country. Why am I sharing this backstory? Well, because there is a very interesting island called Roatan in Honduras, where a startup city now named Prospera was founded in 2017, and it advertised itself as the fastest growing private city project in the world. Now, a lot of the people that backed this were big investors, including Coinbase, Balaji, Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, other big VCs. So a lot of Americans backed this this startup city. And the whole promise was basically like, we're going to create a city from scratch that Prospera, meaning prosperity, that leads to more prosperity, because we're going to kind of like start with first principles thinking about what leads to prosperity and then create the city from scratch. Now, get into the lawsuit. What's happening? So a new government came in to power in Honduras with a new president who is more left-leaning, not as interested in some of these libertarian ideas, and she wants to shut down Prospera. And so there's a big $11 billion lawsuit. These billionaires who founded it are suing the Honduran government. Am I on track here?
You're doing great. It's a good rundown. It's complicated, but you're doing great.
Okay. All right. So what did I miss here? What did I miss, and why is this interesting to you?
So you didn't really miss anything. I'm going to dive into a little bit more just of how there may be an opportunity here. You didn't miss anything big. This story stuck out to me because I was pitched to invest in Prospera at the very beginning, and I've been invited there multiple times. And the entire time I've kind of backed off and said, no. And the only reason I not into this, because I would consider myself like a free market, definitely libertarian leaning person who thinks of like a utopia like this is great. The reason why I was like, you know what, I don't want anything to do with this is because I've been through this multiple times. There's a Galt's Gulch project in Chile. If anybody remembers this listening, please give me a message, because I have a crazy backstory on that. It's happened in Panama. It's happened all over Asia. It's happened in some African nations, which is this idea that a bunch of libertarian type people get together, get some land. They want to form a sovereign nation. And in this sovereign nation, they're going to have low taxes, very low bureaucracy, and basically have the population rely on each other through intellect and free market principles to prosper. And this project on Roatan, the island of Roatan off Honduras, it's a perfect example of that. And the people financially backing this, who you mentioned, these big VCs, are more or less self-proclaimed libertarians. The reason I don't want anything to touch with this is because I've been doing business in foreign markets for almost 20 years, especially in Latin America. And I saw exactly where this is going. What happens is that things go great in all these Latin American countries for a while, and then some left-leaning lunatic politician gets in and turns the country socialist. And this is exactly what's happening in Honduras right now. So the current president, she has made all kinds of threats to Trump because she doesn't like this U.S.-led world order and his crazy politics that she thinks are inferior to her socialist broken government style, and she's basically retaliating on what's happening with U.S. politics by targeting this community there. And there's a bunch of companies that are U.S. companies that are domiciled in Prospera, and they're in big trouble. So it's a little bit of a, I don't want to say "and I told you so" because I feel bad for these people. There's huge money on the line here, but it's no surprise to me. And I wanted to bring this story up because it's a reminder to a lot of people that, there's a lot of incredible places around the world and there's incredible things happening. But as somebody who's gone out into the world and done this and lost money, don't get sucked into these stories of like this new, nation state getting formed in a formerly socialist area that's going to prosper and far into the future. It's highly likely that a new government's going to come in eventually and stomp out that dream. And America really is the best place to be when it comes to, forming a company and having prosperity and freedom and a legal system that works. I'm not saying U.S. is perfect. It's just far superior to everything else.
The most compelling critique in my mind of what Trump is doing in America right now, and why there's an argument against rooting out the like established quote unquote deep state bureaucratic class, is that they provide the stability that investors, entrepreneurs need, that keeps the policies on the same path regardless of who gets into power, right? And this is the greatest argument that I can hear about why what Trump is doing is not good is what happens if the next person comes in and has radically different policies. They are, let's just say AOC gets elected to be president of the United States and decides to, through executive orders, through all these certain policies, completely change the trajectory of how the U.S. deals with international relations, everything, right? And I think what you see on a smaller level in these countries, especially in Latin America, it's the massive swing back of one policy to the next, one administration to the next administration with completely different outcomes. And that makes it really hard for people to think long term. So,
that's part of the beauty of the United States, though. I mean, I'm a total fan of what Musk is doing with Doge and like cleaning up the government. There's this thing that came out yesterday about how the Social Security has been paying out all these benefits to millions of people over the age of 130. What? Like that, of course, that doesn't exist, which means our Social Security system is broken and it's just beyond repair. It's almost like you need to reset everything. But the point is that like when the U.S. cannot continue going on like this stuff needs to be fixed. But the beauty of the U.S. is that we do have this kind of like gridlock with Congress and the and the Senate and the executive branch and the judiciary branch. You've got all these like arms of government that kind of fight with each other, and that prevents rapid change, which means that the government more or less kind of bumps along, like you said, and doesn't have these radical swings back and forth.
Well, this is the argument I'm saying is that right now, if you're a left-leaning pundit, right? Ezra Klein, for example, was just released this podcast talking about how his fear is that right now Republicans have the majority in the Senate and the House,
right? And
they're effectively giving up their power by not forcing Trump to get things done through the Senate and through the House, through Congress, and that this is the start of a new power being added to the executive branch. I don't know if I necessarily agree with it. I think it's the most compelling critique that I've heard for. I agree with you. I think it's great when things go through Congress. A lot of the stuff right now is not being pushed through Congress. We don't know what the outcome is going to be, whether it's going to be held up challenged in the courts and pushed through anyway, or pushed back to Congress. I'm not totally sure, but yeah, the beauty of the United States, in my opinion, is that you do have to have some sort of coalition to make things happen. And back to kind of the critique of the government, why I think a lot of the stuff Trump is doing is actually smart. It's because over the period of the last 100 years, Congress has been giving up their power voluntarily because they don't want to be on the hook for decision-making outcomes from their constituents, right? This is something that was not foreseen by some of our founding fathers. I think where there's kind of a bug in the system. They had this idea that ambition would check ambition. So if ambition from the executive branch desired more power, well, then ambition from members of Congress would also desire power, and they would fight and wrestle over checks and balances. The reality, though, is that a lot of these members of Congress don't want to be on the hook for decisions that they could look like. They don't want to be on the hook for defining votes that the public could change their mind on in the future.
Yeah, they're pussies. They're straight up pussies. They just don't want to stand up for what they believe in. They want to stand up for what they think is getting them reelected, which is like the ultimate weak position.
Well, it's also term limits, right? There's term limits for presidents, and there's no term limits for Congress. You change this by implementing term limits, and then they're not going to be in the same spot where they're like, you've got people in there for 40 years. Like I said at the beginning of like they come in, they're making $80K a year, $100K. I don't know what it is.
Pelosi or McConnell, like two opposite sides of the aisle. Get out of here. You guys do not represent the U.S. population.
No,
you're literally the silent generation. And you're multi-millionaires, both of you. Get out of office. It's, oh man, that's a disgrace in the U.S. political system. But I think, I get what you're saying, which is, having this kind of, grind of change in the government. And I think everyone agrees with that. Doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. Like, people understand that's how the U.S. government is formed. I think this, for lack of a better term, this red wave of voters in the U.S., though, have said enough bullshit. We're okay with some short-term pain to change this insane policy that's been going on for decades now. We need to kind of like start over on a lot of these government institutions like Social Security, like any of these three-letter agencies that are wasting money, like, God knows what we're finding out in real time right now. We just need to have this like short-term almost reset of understanding, where is all this money going? Why aren't our lives getting better, even though our taxes are getting higher and we're spending more money? We need to figure this out.
Why are roads deteriorating? Yes. Why are bridges falling down? Why are planes crashing? Even though we're spending more and more. I fully agree, and I see the greater vision. I actually see that there's a massive benefit in the fact that this is happening in Trump's second term. There's 4 years. There's no more time after that. Mm-hmm. There's no need.
It's a Hail Mary for him.
It's a Hail Mary, and like you can do some stuff that, again, a lot of the, let's just say, like left-leaning commentators are like, well, why isn't he doing it through Congress? Well, Congress is gutless. They don't want to do these things because they're going to be on the hook, where Trump's not really on the hook. Doesn't need to go, and he's not going to get campaign again. This is like a one-time thing where they might be able to cut some of the spend and get us back towards a baseline. You got one of the smartest people in the world working on it. So I'm definitely
think also
pro.
Trump's first term, people were, he wants to get richer because he's this like egomaniac billionaire, which he might be. But
he might be, and he might get richer.
And he might be, but I actually think the second term, he's more concerned about legacy versus wealth building. Of course, wealth building for any billionaire is top of the list, but I think he's much more concerned about a legacy. And I think his legacy is going to be much more. I mean, the guy's 78, right? He's going to be, he's not going to be around forever. So is he more concerned about being at the top of the list in wealth, which he won't get there? I mean, Bezos and Musk have got him beat by 100-fold. He's not going to get there. So what's more important? Legacy. So he wants to be remembered as this president that goes out by making things better and doing these peace agreements and all that. And whether you agree with what he's doing or not, I think that that's what he's motivated for right now, which is a legacy. We'll just have to see like what he prioritizes for that legacy.
Totally. And let's be honest. You can just look at some of the people he's appointed. Those aren't political appointments designed to help him get rich.
No.
They all have, every single one of them, not every single one, but for the most part, if you look at some of the ones that were more controversial, why are they controversial? It's because they're diving into parts of the government that have become either
Corrupt, just say it. I mean, just like,
corrupt. Well, no, there's corruption, and then also just when I think of like, it's like too hard to navigate. It's opaque because they're just too large, and most of them want to rip that apart, and there's not a lot of money in like ripping those apart, at least in my opinion. But I want to kind of transition to something that's interesting, because speaking of one of those appointees, who I was very excited about, RFK Jr.
Maha.
What Maha? He was appointed. He the head of HHS, and he gave a great acceptance speech, right? And he talks about how he has just prayed for this opportunity for like 20 years to be able to focus on the childhood chronic health issue in our country. And I think he's probably the most, maybe him and Trump are like the number 1A and 1B of most misrepresented people on earth. But his speech was great. And he talks about in his acceptance speech, a 50-mile walk that his uncle, JFK, challenged Americans to take in the 1960s. And I looked into this a little bit more because it was very interesting to me. So this first started in 1908. President Theodore Roosevelt, one of my favorite politicians of all time, probably my favorite American president, issued an executive order in 1908 that required every single Marine officer to be able to cover the distance of 50 miles on foot within 20 hours. So that's a serious challenge. But back then, the military went to, from what I read, the military was like, we're doing this. And they, strapped on gear and went out and they did their 50-mile walk. The late 60s, or late 62, President JFK, he heard about this 50-mile walk and this order, decided to revive the challenge. He issued it to Americans. He said, hey, Marine Corps, you guys test against these old standards, and I want Americans to consider a 50-mile walk. And then after he got shot in 63, people latched onto this and they said, that is something that is interesting. We believe in it. And it sparked this huge 50-mile walk frenzy. So actually the 63rd annual JFK 50 miler, a lot of the 50-mile ultra marathons are inspired from this 50-mile walk. That's held every single year. There's a JFK 50-mile run every year on November 22nd, the anniversary of the date he was assassinated. So I listened to this, Cody and I listened to this, and we thought this 50-mile walk is a great idea. So if you're listening to this podcast and you also think, and so the context of the 50-mile walk, it's 50 miles in 20 hours. And that's the only requirement. You just got to walk 50 miles in 20 hours, which is no small feat. I think it's definitely more than I've ever walked in a day in my entire life.
That's gnarly. That's two marathons, gnarly. Basically.
Two marathons. You have to wake up real early and get rolling. But both of us are excited about this. If you are excited about doing a 50-mile walk, email us. You can email austin@adventurecapitalist.com. And what we're going to do is plan a day this year.
We're doing it.
And we're going to do a 50-mile walk. And so if it's inspiring to you to get out there and challenge yourself to a fitness challenge, email us, and we would love to. The idea is we'd have some people in different parts of the country, and we all do it on the same day, and you can lead a small group. So if you're interested in that, email us, and we're going to keep talking about this as we get closer and we pick a date and all those things. But want to share because it sounds like a great adventure.
Yeah, it's an accomplishment too. You walk 50 miles in a day in 20 hours. That's something you can hang your hat on. That's something to be proud of.
You have to, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a something that you're going to have to really prep for. Unless you're a runner and you're doing marathons, you can probably do it right away.
I
Either
mean,
way, it's still
still,
going to be a mental grind to
50
do 50
miles is no
miles.
joke. 50 miles is a that's like pretty serious, especially in 20 hours.
It is.
So we'll
It's
pick
cool.
a date, right? We'll pick a date and have some regional spots to do it and get her done.
Get her done. And also, one of the reasons it inspired me was because RFK talks about how he wants to re-challenge Americans to do a 50-mile walk because it's a great mental and physical challenge. And I love the physical and mental challenges. Every time I do something like that, on the other side, I'm like, it's like your Colombia trip.
Yeah, I mean that's what life's really about. If you just live life being all soft and just not challenging yourself, what's the point? You're gonna be on your deathbed just being like, you know what, I just wasted life. Like you gotta challenge yourself.
What it is, it's not all time is equal. And this is I've had this conversation with my friend Nat Eliason a bunch of times. Not all time is equal. You want to have you can live your life and you can go through the have a lot of good days, right? You wake up, you go to the gym, you make breakfast for your kids, you go to work, you have a great day at work, you come home, you have a great dinner with your family, all those different things. Those are great days to have. And you need to stack many of those days if you're going to be successful. But they are not that memorable. And if you do something like a 50-mile walk, or you climb a mountain in Colombia, or I even think about this day when I just woke up and was like, I'm going to go do this 26-mile hike through the Olympic Peninsula and up through the mountains. It was really, really hard. I still look back on that day. I remember almost the entire day because it was so out of my ordinary. And that's at the core, right? What we want to inspire everyone here to do is to think a little bit more about doing those types of activities and get outside your comfort zone, because that is where the gold is.
Yeah, of course. That's what being a venture capitalist is. It's like you said in the beginning, living an exciting life. I'll leave everyone with a little call to action. Go to X, go to Austin and my profile. I'm going to be posting some videos of my Colombia suffrage up the mountain. I forgot to mention the mountain we climbed. It wasn't like a switchback mountain. It was just like vert. It was just straight up. It was pure punishment. So I've got some pretty funny videos of me just suffering with chapped lips and like boogers coming down and like frost on my face. I'm going to post some videos on there, and hopefully it's inspiring for people to go out and do an adventure and maybe do 50 miles.
Where you're going, and we'd love to hear from you.
Yep.
All right. We'll see you guys on the next episode. Thank you for joining us.